The Dhamma is intended to challenge us, challenge our beliefs. The way the Dhamma is, the way the Dhamma functions, it is to dislodge our sense of what is acceptable to and for us. What is our yardstick? That itself has to be thrown out the window when it comes to the Dhamma. Every time we sit, every time we approach the Dhamma, approach the teachings, approach its principles, what Lord Buddha is teaching again and again. So when you think of it, the Dhamma is quite challenging. That's why a lot of people fall off like dry twigs from a tree. They don't go anywhere. They can't, because they got whatever they needed from the Dhamma and they fall off. It's too much to ask a person to challenge, let alone throw away their own measures of what it is that they think the spiritual path is all about, or spirituality, or religious practice, or the seeking, the quest for the truth for them. It's too big of a pill to swallow, as they say. It's too much. It's too shocking. It's too we like our comfort. So Dhamma comes in and shakes us out of that state of comfort. Ultimately, what is moha? Delusion. Why would anyone stay in delusion? Well, for the simple reason that it is the status quo. It is what I'm used to. It is my homeostasis. It is the balance that I found to work for me. What really is perfect alignment of what I accept. That's why most people are living stale lives. If you've ever tasted fresh bread and then at the same time taste stale bread, you will know. In fact, once you've tasted fresh bread, and then any time throughout your life, if you come across a piece of bread that is in fact a day old, you will know there's something wrong about this. So it's stale. It is not fresh. The Dhamma is fresh. That's why it's challenging. And that's why we're, as I was mentioning again and again throughout these Poṭṭhapāda Suttas, sections, which today happens to be the finale, if you will, the last portion of this wonderful sutta. It's such a deep sutta. We see how Poṭṭhapāda came in with some ideas, some very solid, really anchored, well in place, concretized principles of what he thought or what he thinks is religious practice, ideas. What is the spiritual path all about? And in those days, as we mentioned, it had to do with perception. In fact, the ending, cessation of perception. But they were challenged by that, because at the end, it's like an open-ended. It could go either way, and they were very uncomfortable with that. I mean, who wouldn't be? You want something certain. You can't have it be changed one day and then something else the next day, and it's too, it creates disharmony. It doesn't bring contentment at all. It is a state of insecurity, instability, confusion, and perplexity, and doubt. And that's why those students who came from such traditions, such outside sectarian traditions, to Lord Buddha to ask questions over the course of 45 years. They left their past ideas and schools of thought, and they fully submerged themselves into the Dhamma because they realized this is it. Why? Because this challenges everything I thought about the spiritual path. As evidenced by what? By the very fact that the moment I am relinquishing my ideas about the Dhamma and following a set of rules, a set of principles rather, meaning the Four Noble Truths, if I'm attached to something, it will cause pain, because that means I've anchored myself into this thing that is unfixed. Everything is impermanent. Everything is based on conditions that are constantly changing. So how in the world am I fixing anything anywhere? But I'm feeling pain. Okay, that's dukkha. Okay, so this is normal to have dukkha whenever I'm holding on so tightly onto my desires. Okay, so we have now the first and second noble truths. But that's where people were stuck. To this day, Western philosophical schools, Western schools of thought, in fact, are stuck. Many of them are stuck on the first noble truth, and they don't even realize that there's a truth there to be realized. And that's where the nobility part comes in. Noble truth. They're not even aware. They just are complaining, yelling and screaming and crying. Why is this happening? You know, there's pain, but they don't understand, they don't appreciate the pain of delusion. And there is a legitimate cause, and it is not an outside source that is the author of my pain. That is giving yourself the legitimacy, the ownership of being the author of that suffering. But here, these ascetics were coming to Lord Buddha and hearing that no, it's not just the first and the second noble truths, but there's a third one. In fact, there is a release from that. That gives you the sense of, the sigh of relief. That's what kept people there, especially because not only the promise of relief, Nirodha, but the way to get to it. That's the third and the fourth noble truths. That's the Noble Eightfold Path, which is the middle path, Majjhima Pada. People forget that questions must serve a purpose. They can't be just for being argumentative, for debating. Otherwise, it's just mental acrobatics. It's pointless, it's meaningless, it's stupid. It's a waste of time otherwise. But questions, when they are legitimate, when they come from a good place of query, from real desire to learn, for the sake of finding peace and tranquility and happiness, harmony within oneself, in one's heart, then they're wonderful, because they serve a purpose then. But then you have to find a person or a place, a source that can provide answers to that. So these individuals, one after the other, Venerable Sariputta being one, Venerable Moggallana, and all countless bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, countless arahants, they have taken that path which involved challenging and completely making yourself, allowing yourself, being vulnerable to the power of the Dhamma and the challenges that it must, that's a mandatory factor. That's how you know if it is Dhamma or not, when it comes and challenges you from your old narratives, pulls them out from their roots. And it is uncomfortable, of course. It's an extraction. It's much more painful, depending on how attached we are to those initially, than an extraction of a tooth. So for some people, that's too much to ask and they leave. But here, we see Poṭṭhapāda, the ascetic, the recluse. He was really jolted by what Lord Buddha had said. But he was surrounded by his own students, the 300, and they really attacked him at the end of that discourse with Lord Buddha, when they came at him at Poṭṭhapāda and complained. It was like, oh, you're just let him get away with not answering those 10 questions, left them indeterminate or undetermined. How could you be a true ascetic? It sounds like you're his student. He wasn't, because he still has his own delusions about self. So here we see, from where we left off last time, Poṭṭhapāda coming to Lord Buddha a few days later and giving a report as to what ensued after Lord Buddha left on his Pindapada, and having answered Poṭṭhapāda's questions in front of those 300 recluses in Queen Mallika's debating hall. So after Lord Buddha answered his questions about the self and all that, by the way, Poṭṭhapāda had come along with his friend Citta Hati Sariputta, who happened to be Citta, the son of Sari, who is the elephant trainer. So we're going to see now Citta, begin to ask his questions. And the questions are not intended to engage Lord Buddha into further debate, which is another thing. In the earliest days of the Nikāyas, actually in the earliest days of the Dhamma, as we see in the Book of the Fours, Atthakavagga of the Sutta Nipata, Lord Buddha categorically instructed bhikkhus to avoid debating. He considers it an utter waste of time. It's stupid, he calls it, because it keeps and leaves everyone stupid and angry at each other. Because there's always going to be, if you're going to have a debate, even if one person wins, somebody's going to lose, and that's going to create bitterness and hatred, anger, dosa. So how did that, and there's no wisdom that comes out of any debate. So here, Citta doesn't come with the intention of debating with Lord Buddha. So let's see. Then Citta Hati Sariputta, son of the elephant trainer, respectfully addressed the Blessed One and asked this question. Bhante, when there is the gross acquisition of self, are both the mind-made or mental acquisition of self and the formless acquisition of self empty and therefore false, mogha in Pali, at that time? In other words, is it the gross acquisition of self alone that is real for him at that time? So if you recall, you can just go back to the last session we did. I think it was part 4 of the Poṭṭhapāda Sutta. Poṭṭhapāda asked questions about the self initially when Lord Buddha was there in the debating hall. But next time, at the end of those sessions, when Poṭṭhapāda came in to give the report to Lord Buddha as to what ensued after he had left, Lord Buddha, out of his compassion, came out because he saw that Poṭṭhapāda is stuck on this thing called the self. For him, the self is so difficult to eradicate, pluck out. To this day, everywhere you see this. Ego, 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 myself, my identity. So in India, in those days, as it is today, people really were attached to this idea of an Atman or Atta. So Lord Buddha compassionately broke down the self to help. Not like we do believe in the presence of a self, but Lord Buddha went into the arena of Poṭṭhapāda and his way of thinking and unrolled a set of principles, acquisition of a gross self, mind-made self, and a formless self, which Poṭṭhapāda could relate to. Otherwise, the Dhamma that Lord Buddha was offering Poṭṭhapāda was too advanced, was too much. His worldview had no place for what Lord Buddha was trying to convey. So, as the superior teacher that Lord Buddha was, and is throughout the suttas, as we see, Lord Buddha is using the vocabulary, the terminology, the ideologies, in fact, if you will, of the listener, of the questioner, to teach the Dhamma that is far outside of that zip code of theirs, of whatever they find to be acceptable. So imagine this: if you, and when other beings come in from a different dimension to this planet, let's say 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th dimensions or more, they show up. We who live in this 4-dimensional world, 4 as in, X, Y, Z, depth and time, that's the 4th dimension, even though we say we live in the 3-dimensional world. But let's say such a being comes in order for us to understand their dimension of existence, we're going to have to refer back to the 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional world that we're acquainted with, as well as the other being will have to use that to make us understand and have some form of comprehension as to where they might be from. So Lord Buddha is speaking the Dhamma to Poṭṭhapāda using, in this case now, Citta, because Citta is doing a follow-up question of Poṭṭhapāda's, which Lord Buddha had explained: gross acquisition of self, which is the body, physical, as you see, this person, etc. Then there's the mind-made body, which we saw a few weeks ago or a month ago with Chulapantaka, Venerable Chulapantaka, creating a mind-made body, actually 1,000 of copies of himself. You could do that. And when you're imagining you're doing that, when you are contemplating, when you're doing a lot of visualization, there's also an element of mind-made. You're creating it with your mind. And then Lord Buddha presented the 3rd acquisition of a self, which is the acquisition of formless self, which was basically the realm of being where these yogis, as Poṭṭhapāda's teachers, etc., would aspire to be reborn into the formless realms, which, by the way, Siddhartha Gautama, Lord Buddha's previous teachers, the last 2, ended up being reborn into these 2 realms of formlessness, which Lord Buddha said are not the path. They're just one of those other 31 realms, which means you are still stuck in suffering, which means the holy life has not been lived. But that's what the Dhamma is all about. So now he's asking this follow-up question. So he asked about the acquisition of a self, gross self, and then he's going to do, he's asking about those 3 aspects. So he says, similarly, while there is the experiencing of the mind-made acquisition of a self, are both the physical or gross acquisition of self and the formless acquisition of self empty and therefore false at that time? So while you're in it, let's say, is that the only reality there is? So when you are conscious of the body, what happens to the mind-made body? He's asking. What happens to the formless body, Bhante? But he's also asking in reference to time, the past, the present, and the future. In other words, is it the mind-made acquisition of self alone that is real for him at that time? And Bhante, while there is the experiencing of the formless acquisition of self, are both the physical or gross acquisition of self and the mind-made acquisition of self empty and therefore false at that time? In other words, is it the formless acquisition of self alone that is real for him at that time? So I do know from what I've read upon quantum mechanics or quantum theory, they say that, by the way, they say that throughout the world, there's probably 5 people who understand quantum theory. 5 people, not 5% of all theoretical physicists. No, 5 people on the whole face of the earth. So even it's so hard for us to understand, but based on what we can make intelligible out of all that data, they say that, let's presume it's one of those or 5 of those people talking to us, they say that when you're looking at something, you are selecting only one possibility out of a multitude, in fact, countless other possibilities. And that becomes real, everything else falls away. So here's Citta is asking, well, Bhante, when I am experiencing the formless acquisition of self, which he doesn't know much about yet, but just because Lord Buddha mentioned it, he does know the gross acquisition of self when you are living, inhabiting this body, or when you're in the mind-made body, such as you're imagining or visualizing, or even dreaming that body, when it becomes so real. What happens to the form or gross body? Do they stop existing? Which is, in a sense, a legitimate question, although it might seem to many of us like, duh. Of course, it's only real, whatever it is that you're experiencing. But he's asking, with genuine interest. Citta, this is Lord Buddha's response. At the time when the gross acquisition of self is present, it is not reckoned as mental or mind-made acquisition of self, for that does not come into view. Also, it is not reckoned as formless acquisition of self, for that too does not come into view, because at that time it is only reckoned and acknowledged as simply the gross acquisition of self. Because that is the only thing that you are percipient of. Remember, the whole question of Poṭṭhapādas started with and involved primarily perception. In fact, how to attain cessation of perception, because it is annoying. Perception, to have perception, eventually when you go deep in meditation, you discover how it was stillness. Everything is, especially in the realm of nothingness and neither perception nor non-perception. Everybody's quest is involving basically a state of Nirodha, ending of perception. Thoughts, memories, things that come and jolt you out of that quietude, that tranquility, that contentment. Ideas start popping in. Why? So sooner or later, the yogis had realized that there needs to be a state of cessation. And that's what Lord Buddha was also pursuing. But every time he came out of those formless attainments of jhana, he was still back in saññā land, perception land. So that is what we're still after. Similarly, Citta, at the time when the mental or mind-made acquisition of self is present, it is not reckoned as gross because it's now the mind-made, right? So Lord Buddha is now addressing each of those acquisition of gross self, which he just did, and now he's addressing the mental or mind-made acquisition of self is present, it is not reckoned. For that does not come into view. Also, it is not reckoned as formless acquisition of self. For that too does not come into view, because at that time it is only reckoned and acknowledged as simply the mind-made acquisition of self. Similarly, Citta, at the time when the formless acquisition of self is present, it is not reckoned as gross or physical acquisition of self, as in the attaining the state of nothingness, in the jhanic state of nothingness, which is the 7th jhana. So you're not creating any mind-made bodies, and the body doesn't exist. You're in the 7th jhana. There's nothingness. So you are not percipient of the body at that time, in this case, in this sutta, according to what Citta is asking, and Lord Buddha's response to him. Furthermore, it is not reckoned as mind-made acquisition of self, for that too does not come into view, because at that time it is only reckoned and acknowledged as simply the formless acquisition of self. So there isn't that identification, because the moment there is, you drop back into the awareness of the body. Citta, this is where Lord Buddha is trying to now connect these three to the three phases of time as we understand it. Citta, imagine people were to approach and ask you the following: were you in the past, or was it that you did not exist in the past? Will you be in the future, or is it that you will not exist or be in the future? Or how about, are you now, or is it that you are not existing or being now? So imagine somebody's asking you that. How would you reply to them, Citta? Very down to earth, question. Bhante, he responds, if they were to question me in that manner, then I would answer thus: I was in the past, seeing that I did exist and therefore was in the past. I will be in the future, seeing that I will exist and therefore be in the future. Such as, I'm driving to the store, let's say. I'm driving to school, okay? I'm here. I will be at school, on campus, or at the store in the future. But am I in it? Am I there? And then he says, I will reply, Bhante, I am now, seeing that I do exist and therefore am, as in, I am in the car driving. I am walking on the street towards the campus. Then the Blessed One asked Citta another question by saying, then Citta, if they were to ask you, that acquisition of self you had in the past, would you consider that acquisition of self as being exclusively and truly real, whereas the future acquisition of self and the present acquisition of self to both be false and non-real? Or would you consider the acquisition of self you will have in the future as being exclusively and truly real, and the other two false? Or would you consider the acquisition of self you do have now in the present as being exclusively and truly real, and the other two false? So he's addressing all three times, obviously, but using the three acquisitions of self. And then Citta responded by saying, Bhante, if they were to ask me such questions, then I would reply thus: whatever acquisition of self I had in the past, at that time, and when it was happening, he's talking about the past, right? When it was happening, that acquisition of self alone I considered as being exclusively and truly real. Whereas the future acquisition of self and the present acquisition of self to both be false and non-real. When? In the past. While I was in the past, to me, basically, they were irrelevant. The present that is now, which was the future of the past, I know the mind, it can be a little bit, as well as the one in the future. Similarly, whatever acquisition of self I will have in the future, at that time, and when it will happen, that acquisition of self alone I will consider as being exclusively and truly real, and the other two false and non-real, because they're no longer there. They're no longer relevant. And whatever acquisition of self I do have now in the present, at this time, and as it is happening, this very acquisition of self alone I consider as being exclusively and truly real, and the other two false and non-real. If everybody approached the be here now concept that people have been shoving down our throats in the case of, oh yeah, Buddhism, yeah, be here, be present. If they could just look at it in this context, it would reduce so much of their suffering. If they could just observe it in reference to how I view the future, how I view the past, and how I am viewing the present. which is real. Which one of these is real? Because it makes so much sense now when you look at it in this way. Lord Buddha responds now. It says, in just the same manner, Citta, at whatever time the gross or physical acquisition of self is there, at that time it is not reckoned as mental or mind-made acquisition of self, for that does not come into view. This because at that time, Citta, it is reckoned only as gross or physical acquisition of self. Remember, this still has everything to do with perception. It is the person's perception that is the interpreter of life. The way we understand life is very much patched up, painted, colored, outlined, interpreted, and smudged by our perceptions. So many people are living in the present, but they're living in the future. In their mind, they are not present. If I do this, then that will happen. Okay, let me push through this because I want that to be happening. What? That thing that will or would be happening when? In the future. Meanwhile, I am here. So they are living while projecting themselves in a different time. How could that be? How could that give us any happy state of being? Or they live in the past. I am living this, and it's actually just a repetition of what happened to me yesterday. Oh, yes, yesterday was terrible. Yes, yes. Or in my childhood, this and that. Identifications again. Where am I identified? When am I identified? Maybe that could be asked by us every so often. When am I living? Could be a legitimate question to ask, to shake you out of your status quo, to shake you out of dukkha. When are you suffering? You can only suffer in the present, just like you can only experience Nirodha in the present. You can only experience suffering in the present as well. But for what? Usually it's because we are holding on to some idea, some perception specifically, that has to do with other times, meaning we're not present. We are over there in the future or over there in the past. And Lord Buddha says this in the Dhammapada and other places. The past is dead and gone, and the future is not even here, not even shown up, it's not even born yet. But so much is being sacrificed for both, or for either one of those, but not the one that matters. Similarly, Citta, at whatever time the mental or mind-made acquisition of self is present, at that time it is not reckoned as gross or physical acquisition of self, for that does not come into view. This because at that time, Citta, it is reckoned only as mind-made or mental acquisition of self. So here, as the meditator, so if I were to explain this in terms of the jhanas, when the person is going into the arupa jhanas, infinity, conscious, boundless infinity of space, boundless infinity of consciousness, the person is aware, starting with the fourth jhana. There's so much equanimity everywhere. The body, the person's connection with the body, that sense of the powerful, solid, or solidity of the body has been dropped. Now, the person, if they're practicing properly, they still are aware that this is happening. There's full awareness of this taking place. So the person is not oblivious of the body. They do know this is mind-made. This is all because of training. Remember, in the first 4 aspects or sections of the Poṭṭhapāda we've covered, Lord Buddha was saying again and again, as you see Poṭṭhapāda, with training, certain perceptions arise and certain perceptions disappear. So the person who was going through the jhanic stages, the first, four, or actually the three, they were very much aware of the body, although it was getting less and less and less and less solid. It was becoming more porous, more, until in the fourth jhana, you just start, poof, you make that breakaway from the physicality, the tangibility of the body. So you're not lost, you're aware that this is a mind-made. So at that time, Lord Buddha is saying, the gross acquisition of self is not even there to talk about, as well as the formless, because you're not there yet. Also, Citta, at whatever time the formless acquisition of self is present, at that time, it is not reckoned as gross or physical acquisition of self, because now you know that it's not in the body, and you're not mind-made, so now you're in the formless, as in the seventh jhana specifically. Because you cannot be aware while you're in the eighth jhana, the neither perception nor non-perception. There's no way that you could know that while you're in it, that you're in it. You can only know that you were in it when you come out of it. But anyhow, let's just focus on the seventh, which is the realm of nothingness, which the mind is able to perceive formlessness. This is an area that a lot of people are confused about. There's a lot of talk about it, but not enough comprehension, not enough understanding, it seems. But Lord Buddha is laying it out beautifully here. Simply. In simple terms, that is. This because at that time, Citta, it is reckoned only as formless acquisition of self. Because there is still a level of perception here at this level. Remember, there was that teaching that Lord Buddha gave to Poṭṭhapāda as a clear delineation or distinction between the path of the yogis, which was taking them to the eighth jhana, which there's no liberation there, neither perception nor non-perception. But the reason why we have the Dhamma is because Lord Buddha discovered the other path, and that's only something that Buddhas discover. That's why they become the Buddha. They become Arahants for the first time in a very, very long time, when there's absolute darkness in the world, in existence. So Lord Buddha knew very well, as Siddhartha, the eighth jhana, and there was no liberation there. Suffering was still to greet one because perceptions were still there. But then he discovered the other, cessation, true cessation. Saññā Vedayita Nirodha Samapatti. That is the cessation of perceptions and feelings, both. But the jumping board, the springboard, the place where these both have to stem from, could stem from, is the nothingness realm, okay? Which is a formless realm, which you still have perceptions of. So you're percipient of it while you're in it. For this, a good sutta to help you understand this better would be the Anupada Sutta, the Majjhima Nikāya 111, where Lord Buddha is explaining beautifully, as he always does, but beautiful progress of Venerable Sariputta, as he went through each of these jhanic stages, and he saw, he observed, he was percipient of each of these that I mentioned, until he got to the nothingness realm, which he was still percipient of, and he saw that this is still not liberation. At that point, he went further, but he went the path of Lord Buddha's. He took the path to cessation. That is what we call Nirodha. From what? Nirodha from saññā, from perceptions. You literally switch off perception. And it is the breakaway point to Arahantship. And that's what Lord Buddha was saying. You're talking to me, Poṭṭhapāda, asking me all these questions about how to cease, how to create or bring about the cessation of perception, but your understanding is totally different. I'm going to present to you what the path of the Tathagata is, and the training, what it involves, and the true Nirodha that you could achieve, as my students have. That's what he was saying. So it was for that promise that also you could see why Poṭṭhapāda left his buddies and came around and listening to Lord Buddha to find out more. So here, Lord Buddha is going to use this wonderful, amazing analogy, this metaphor that to this day, philosophers in the West and around the world are stunned at the lucidity, at the perfection, at the flowing, at the versatility of Lord Buddha's in utilizing such a beautiful, simple simile to describe such a complex phenomenon and principle in the understanding of perception. So let's see. So I titled this section, Simile of Milk and its Chain of Refined Transformations. Just like milk comes from a cow, Citta, and curd comes from milk, and butter from curd, and ghee from butter, and cream of ghee from ghee itself. At the time that it is still milk, it is not reckoned nor considered as curd, nor as butter, nor as ghee, nor as cream of ghee, which is considered their very best version. So it's the crème de la crème of milk, the cream of ghee, which is, they would take the purified ghee and they would still continue to boil it and let it, be more refined, and it has this sweet taste to it. It's so light. It's so incredibly light. And it's more expensive, obviously. So Lord Buddha is using something so familiar to everyone, but he's describing such a complex series of phenomena that take place in the mind as the progression of the training is going on for the bhikkhu. Now, Citta, at the time that it is still milk, it is reckoned only and simply as milk. Therefore, it is not reckoned nor considered as curd or butter or ghee or cream of ghee. At that time, it is considered exclusively as milk. No one can argue that, right? Similarly, when it is curd, it is reckoned only as simply as curd, or like yogurt, where no one considers or assumes it to still be milk or butter or ghee or cream of ghee, somehow hiding in it. You don't go around looking inside the butter, hey, where's the ghee in here? Where's the milk? You can't find the milk. It's gone. So if your present moment of life, let's pluck out from this Lord Buddha's beautiful example, if it is purified ghee stage that you're living, don't go looking for the milk. And don't go looking for the crème de la crème. It's not shown up yet. Appreciate the purified ghee that you are. Just stretching out a little bit. So similarly, when it has turned into butter, it is reckoned only and simply as butter, where no one considers or assumes it to still be milk or curd or ghee or cream of ghee, somehow hiding in it. It is simply seen and reckoned as butter. Similarly, when it has turned into ghee, it is reckoned only and simply as ghee, where no one considers or assumes it to still be milk or curd or butter or cream of ghee, somehow hiding in it. It simply is seen and reckoned as ghee. And Citta, when it has turned into cream of ghee, it is reckoned only and simply as cream of ghee, where no one considers or assumes it to still be milk or curd or butter or even ghee. It is simply seen and reckoned as cream of ghee. If you've been practicing Dhamma, or you practice Dhamma, you will change. Your progress will show in the transformation that is taking place in you, in your character, in your behavior, thanks to the three trainings of Sila, virtue, mind cultivation, bhavana, and panya, the wisdom, discernment that you have today, which you didn't yesterday. Now, if you somehow come across someone that you knew from the past when you lived, I don't know, some questionable ways, questionable to you, that is, now, in ways that you wouldn't approve of today. And you come across individuals from that part of your past, and they look at you, and you sit down and you talk, etc., they will really be looking, probing you to find out where the milk is still. Meanwhile, you've come a long way from being a milk, or even yogurt, or ghee. Maybe you've reached creme de la creme. But people will continue. In fact, they will not stop. They will continue trying to pinpoint the milk in you. So this is something to bear in mind. Because if you practice the Dhamma, sooner or later you will come across situations where you will see the world doesn't agree with you, or you don't agree with the world because of how you see it and how you've become, thanks to the transformation. Just like the milk goes through these transformations. In just the same manner, Citta, at whatever time the gross or physical acquisition of self is there, at that time it is not reckoned as mental or mind-made acquisition of self. And the same thing he mentions about the mental or mind-made acquisition of self. When it is present, the other two don't exist. And as well as with the formless acquisition of self, when it is present, at that time it is not reckoned as gross or physical acquisition of self, for that does not come into view. Just like the milk doesn't come into view, because now we're at the butter stage. After all, Citta, all these are mere designations and conventions of speech, modes of expressions, commonly used definitions and names, practiced in usage by beings in the world, which the Tathagata, although does not grasp at nor is reliant upon, nevertheless, he also puts them into use, simply for the purpose of helping his listeners. What a beautiful explanation. Clarifies so much. It takes away the burden of people who would come trying to disprove Lord Buddha, pin him down and try to say, aha, I got you with this argument type of a thing. Because you were like this, or you're saying this. Yeah, but now, for example, Lord Buddha here is referring to self, the idea, the approach of atta, the belief that people had. So even though Lord Buddha is saying, I'm using the self here, I've broken it down to 3, acquisition of gross self, mind-made, formless. But please, Citta, Poṭṭhapāda, you sitting there next to Citta, please remind yourselves that these are mere designations. To this day, people go fighting with each other in Theravada and other Buddhists, saying, well, the Buddha taught non-self, so he never said self. He never said, well, no. The Lord Buddha used the term I, you, myself. But these are simply designations. What we want to do is just pitch a tent on, next to that and concretize that term and saying, Lord Buddha believed in that. So there's this confusion, or there's is crisscrossing, is negating himself. No. It is using a language, terminology that the listeners are more comfortable in hearing and understanding, so that that mode of teaching, elaborating, could take them to something deeper, where they relinquish the idea of a self, because it's simply that. It's an idea. It's a concept. It's not real. This is called right thinking. Right thinking is what's going to take us to right view, and vice versa. They indicate the same thing, ultimately. And that is the result of progress, gradual. Anupubbha, sikha anupubbha, patipada anupubbha, kiriya. So, Lord Buddha is saying, if you want, and you can tell that he's also addressing Poṭṭhapāda there, because he was still there. They came together, Citta and him. The moksha that they have in India at the time or today, the liberation, freedom, it's not going to come with another birth. Lord Buddha is the only one who taught that liberation, don't look for it to come in the package, in the gift box of a future birth. Once you're there, over there, that's when you're going to be free. In fact, there's the term that we use, crossed over, crossing the flood. You see this a lot, countless times throughout the suttas, a reference to the Arahant, for the Arahant. Many people to this day in Theravada tradition, and you can find this not in recent authors or teachers, but also the commentaries or the commentators, they started promoting this idea almost 1,000 years ago, where, once you're there in Nibbana, your suffering is going to stop. Your ignorance, your attachments, your craving is going to fall off, is going to fall away once you've reached Nibbana. There's no such thing that Lord Buddha talks about in the suttas. This is blasphemy, if you will. This is heretical. This has nothing to do with the Dhamma that Lord Buddha taught. But that's what we, I guess it's a very, almost archetypal, maybe it's very primal in us to always postpone it, to always put it over there and say, I'm going to attain that state of bliss once I am there. And that is not Dhamma. That's what Lord Buddha is trying to say again and again to Poṭṭhapāda, now to Citta. It's all about right thinking that comes from the person who holds right view, not wrong view, right view, which allow him or her to break free from the old ways of thinking and attaching, grabbing on to these wrong views of a self, which gives you pacchatang veditabbo vinyuhi. That experience becomes real for you because you have gone through the training. You have, thanks to the training, the progress that you yourself have made. When? This is key. Not in some future. Now. Because it is immediately effective. There's a term, sanditthiko, for the Dhamma. That means it is right there, visible, here now. It's immediately effective. To this day, however, sadly, you have millions of Buddhists believing that once they die, they're going to go into this realm where they're going to find, they're going to actually, it's like a suit or a shirt or a robe they're going to slide into, and that robe is Nibbana. Or it's waiting for them over there in some pure land, some type of a nonsensical thing that was the product of lazy monks who didn't want to put the effort to actually understand or practice and then teach that to others. Copying out has nothing to do with the Dhamma. You have hundreds of millions of Buddhists believing in the false teachings. Hundreds of millions. And no one's saying anything about it. That's why we're doing the suttas. In these suttas you find the Dhamma. Because this is your life. Your life is on the line. You have nothing other than your life to really speak of, to do something with. Everything else is false. Everything else is, so you use whatever you can to make the most of this life. And that's what Lord Buddha is saying to Citta. Now, when this was said, then Poṭṭhapāda, the wandering ascetic, addressed the Blessed One and exclaimed, "It is simply magnificent, Bhante. It is excellent, Lord. The Blessed One has made the Dhamma clear in so many ways. I feel as though the Tathagata turned upright what was turned upside down. revealing what was hidden and showing the correct path to those who were lost, just like bringing a brilliantly burning oil lamp into the darkness for all those with eyesight to see, finally. Bhante, I go for refuge to the Blessed One, to the Dhamma, and to the Sangha of Bhikkhus. May the Blessed One accept and remember me as one of his lay followers who has gone to him for refuge for life. This is Poṭṭhapāda. He got what he needed from the Q&A between Lord Buddha and Citta, his friend. Now, then Citta, Hati Sariputta, while also addressing the Blessed One, said, Bhante, indeed, it is simply magnificent, Bhante. It is excellent, O Lord. The Blessed One has made the Dhamma clear to me in so many ways. I feel as though the Tathagata turned upright what was turned upside down, revealing what was hidden by showing the correct path to those who were lost, like bringing a brilliantly burning oil lamp into the darkness for all those with eyesight to see finally. Bhante, with my hands at my heart in respectful anjali, I now ask for your permission to go forth in your presence, so that I may lead the holy life in full. Therefore, I also request to receive the higher ordination. It was in this manner that the elephant trainer's son, Citta, received the going forth in the Blessed One's presence, as well as his higher ordination. So now he became, that's how it used to happen, usually, when the person was above a certain age, especially. In those days, they would get the novice ordination and the higher ordination, upasampada. And so he became a bhikkhu, Citta. It's interesting how Poṭṭhapāda brought along his friend. Hey, let's go. And Poṭṭhapāda walks away as a layman. Citta stays, having shaved his head and become a bhikkhu. Again, remember what I was saying earlier about each of us having a certain yardstick, what is acceptable for us. So we must ask ourselves, for your own, your own curiosity's sake, your own life's sake, I guess, why am I interested in the Dhamma? Really, it's a genuine, you ask such questions with many other things in your life. Why do I want this? Why do I want to go there? But especially, why do I want to practice the Dhamma? Why? It's a legitimate question, which tells you, above all, the measure, the yardstick, the standard that you have, whatever you find to be acceptable for you. What are the parameters of the acceptable for you? Citta, here we see, said, I'm going to go all the way. Poṭṭhapāda said, no, I'm okay with just taking the triple gem as my refuge, which meant that he was not going to go into, I don't have any records of him going back or not going back to those ascetics. But when a person would take refuge in the triple gem throughout the suttas, again and again, we see them changing, doing a 90-degree turn in their path. They become a layperson. So he said, upasaka. So now he's no longer following the path of ascetics or asceticism. So he's going to go back to the lay life, but while taking the triple gem as his refuge, meaning he's going to go earn a living, this and that, but while practicing the Dhamma, which is honorable, far more honorable, and gets him to his goal, with some extra time there to be spent in doing that, versus Citta. Then, while living alone and secluded from the crowd, continuing in his training, being withdrawn, diligent. Actually, before I go and finish it, because that's the ending of the sutta, what this sutta doesn't include is what happens to Citta in between his ordination and his arahantship, because he does become an arahant. We have another sutta that bears his name as the title, Citta Hati Sariputta Sutta, which is from the Anguttara Nikāya, book of the sixes, and if I'm not mistaken, it's Sutta number 60, 60. Anguttara, numerical discourses. I translated that about 3 years ago. Anyhow, beautiful sutta. Because there we see Citta, this Citta, Hati Sariputta, as a bhikkhu, sitting in a group of other Sangha members. Now, that particular setting, when I say Sangha members, there are some Arahants there. Senior most bhikkhus are there. One of them being Venerable Mahakotita, who was an Arahant, who was a very close friend of Venerable Sariputta's. We've seen them before in other suttas. So they're interacting, they're talking, the senior bhikkhus, and they're Arahants. So Citta, meanwhile, had been developing in his jhanic levels. So he was understanding, he was gaining more and more. So he was progressing nicely. And he was gaining a lot of understanding of the Dhamma. But what he does is, in that setting, in that sutta, it's a beautiful setting, and it's so well described in the sutta. Citta keeps interrupting when the senior monks are talking. So Venerable Mahakotita turns to Citta and puts him in his place, basically, and says, Bhikkhu or Citta, when the senior monks are talking, it is appropriate for those who are not senior to not interrupt. If you have something to say, wait for us to finish, then you'll get your own turn. You'll say what you have to say, but do not interrupt us. So imagine Venerable Sariputta and Venerable Mahakotita talking about so subtle aspects of the Dhamma, which, by the way, Citta is not aware of. That's the problem, because he was not an Arahant yet. So if he were an Arahant, then Venerable Mahakotita's instruction or chastising of him would have not happened, because he would already know what they're talking about. So he was saying things that he knew nothing about, you know. So when he says this, some of the other bhikkhus who were friends of Citta's jump in his defense and say, Bhante, come on, this is Citta. He's one of the bright monks we have in this Sangha. He's knowledgeable about the Dhamma. Bhante, he's advanced in the Dhamma. Bhante, please don't be so harsh on him. And Venerable Mahakotita turns to them and says, friends, even though a monk may attain to the first jhana and start saying to himself and others, I am easily able to enter the first jhana, but he goes and associates with other bhikkhus and bhikkhunis all the time, with lay male and female disciples all the time. He hangs out with them all the time. Sooner or later, those things fall off. He falls away from those states. And he goes through all those, primary jhanas. He goes through the fourth jhana, and then he also talks about I think it was the signless Animitta Ceto Samadhi, which is the signless concentration of the heart, of the mind. He says, even if a bhikkhu enters that, which is very high level of attainment, but it's still a jhanic state. He says, by interacting and engaging with all these people, spending his time with companionships left and right, he will fall from that. Where is he saying this? Who's there? Citta is right there. He's talking about Citta in front of the whole Sangha. So lo and behold, after some time, this bhikkhu that they thought was in it for the whole ride, right? He disrobes. Citta disrobes. The same Citta that we're covering today. He disrobes and goes back to the lower life, as it's said in the suttas. Lower life because it is lower than living the holy life, brahmacharya, proper brahmacharya. Otherwise, if you're not living the proper holy life, you're living it with greed, lust, anger, possessiveness, stinginess, jealousy, then how could that be higher than a lay life? Because I know a lot of householders, lay people who live noble lives. They live the holy life, in fact. So how could you compare the two? So that is the caveat for that, because one has to truly be living the brahmacharya life, the holy life proper of a bhikkhu, so that the householder's life might be referred to as the lower life, engaging in sex and all that, as a lay person would go through. Fine. So Citta leaves everything, disrobes, and goes and becomes a lay person again. Now, the bhikkhus, after they're distraught, some of his friends, they're like still bhikkhus. They go to Venerable Mahakotita and they say, Bhante, how did you know? Did you know all along that he was going to disrobe? How did you know? And Venerable Mahakotita was such a, as they say in the vernacular, with no disrespect to the Venerable Arahant, it was a straight shooter, basically. He just said, well, I just looked into his heart. I saw that he was going to disrobe. It's as clear as day. But they also ask him, but initially, did you know, or did the devas tell you? So at first he says, I knew directly. I looked at his heart with my heart and I knew. That's what teachers use, certain teachers who are at that level or have those abilities. Venerable Ajahn Mun, for example, he had that quality. So students would be very careful when they would approach him, or they would avoid him entirely, completely, because he would just say, what was that you were thinking about last night? Isn't that embarrassing? How could you be thinking? So he's like, but he says, he adds, Venerable Mahakotita says, yes, but in addition, the devas came and told me that Bhante, Citta is going to disrobe. So I had two references, he says. And then the bhikkhus go to Lord Buddha and they say, Bhante, this is what happened. That proper reporting mechanism was in place, which was wonderful, because it's, you're always checking your references. That's why we have the Dhamma being unlike any other source of knowledge out there or teaching, because it has all these checks and balances, if you will. So the bhikkhus went to Lord Buddha and reported the matter to him. And they're kind of distraught, and Lord Buddha says, Citta is going to come back. They're stunned. He says, Citta Hati Sariputta will reordain, and in fact, he will become an Arahant. And you can imagine how excited they become, especially because if there's that bond between them as friends in the holy life. So he does return. He leaves it all behind. Citta, he realizes, because his seeds of Dhamma in his past lives were pretty tremendous. And that's why you are here. That's why whoever listens to this recording, once it's a recording out there, you do that, you listen to that and not something else. You need to be acknowledging of that fact. These seeds that nobody else other than yourself have laid, have sown for yourself, and are sowing every time you practice. So now I'm going to come back from the Anguttara Nikāya, which I was sharing that story from. It's a great sutta. You can check it out. Again, it's Numerical Discourses, book of the 6, so 6.60, if I'm not mistaken. Citta Hati Sariputta Sutta. So now we come back to the Poṭṭhapāda Sutta's last portion. So now Citta has returned, he's reordained, so now he's a bhikkhu again. And the sutta continues. Then, while living alone and secluded from the crowd, continuing in his training, being withdrawn, diligent, and dedicated to his resolution to attain release, the Venerable Citta Hati Sariputta realized for himself in this very life, and with his direct knowledge, the highest goal of the holy life, for the sake of which good sons of families rightly go forth from home life into homelessness. Thus, he now personally knew and understood with absolute certainty. Destroyed is birth. The holy life is now fully lived. What had to be done is now done and finally completed. There is no more rebirth into any state of becoming. Thus, the Venerable Citta Hatti Sariputta became one of the Arahants. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And this way we come to close with the Poṭṭhapāda Sutta. This was a giant. I never thought I would be able to do this sutta translated, let alone to actually cover it, because it's such a massive, as you see, so finely nuanced. Lord Buddha was doing very, very minute surgery of perception, which we often neglect to consider the power that it has over our reality. Things we see, the things we understand, the life that you live, the world as you understand it to be that way, it's all dependent on saññā, how you perceive it. And usually because the person has a lot of delusion, that means it's flawed. Hence we live in suffering. And that's why this path is all about the opposite of that. Freedom from suffering. You're not getting freedom from your spouse, your work, or something, or this planet, or situations. You're freeing yourself from suffering. And specifically, you're freeing yourself from the pain of delusion. That's power. When you have wisdom, you have power. It's pretty amazing. So I'll stop here and see if you have any questions, comments, thoughts. Hopefully it's going to help you in your progress, in your path, in your training, this sutta and what you've been exposed to. Let's see. Okay. All right, so in that case, let us transfer some minutes. Akasatha chabumata deva nagamahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu loka sasanam. Akasatha chabumata deva nagamahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasatha chabumata deva nagamahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mamparanti. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May you live with the Dhamma in your hearts. May you see life with Dhamma in your eyes. May you challenge your status quo. And always welcome anytime the Dhamma comes to shake you up from your homeostatic situation, what you've accepted to be, this is my life, this is how it's supposed to be, and that's it. The Dhamma is always providing us with new, so long as we're living with sati and sampajanya, with mindfulness and full awareness, anchored on sila, on virtuous living, then the Dhamma is always going to present you with new material, new, that is, new ways of seeing. Please leave the door open for that. That's what we mean by humility, having the humility to always say yes to the Dhamma and not fall back into whatever comfortable hole that you have. Remember, I think I gave the example of those two turtles once. The frogs, I'm sorry. One lives by the ocean, vastness of the ocean, and somehow loses his way and goes inland and comes across a a hole in the ground, a barrel that's rusty, and there's another frog's chirping or crying at night, and he's like, cousin, can I stay over tonight? And the other frog says, yes, cousin, come to my domain, my vast, vast domain. And this other frog comes in, and it's like he discovers this place stinks. There's rust. There's no proper food. There's no decent water to drink. Meanwhile, the host thinks that this is a vast world. Meanwhile, he's living in a barrel that's rusty, with no food, dirt. So this visiting frog says, come, cousin, come, let's go to my place. I'll take you to where there's boundless space, boundless ocean, so much food, the stars. You can actually see stars. You can't see, you can barely see. What do you mean, he says? I can see the vastness of the stars from this huge place. This is not huge, this is minuscule. For that frog who lives in that hole, it is a universe. But for one who has come from an actual wide open space, and that's what the Dhamma provides us with. So the other frog claims him to be a heretic, claims him to be crazy, and kicks him out. And he says, you are not a good guest. Get out. You're making up all these lies that don't exist. But come, I'll show you. Oh, go. So few are those who go to the Dhamma. Few. Lord Buddha says this even in those days, but even though he says few, countless have been the Arahants. And the world will still produce some Arahants, despite what's going on. Even with that few, or those few. So may you be representatives of those few in this very life. Sukhi Hot. Blessings of the Triple Gem with you and all your loved ones. Till next time.